Good morning and welcome to our session at the Digital Leaders Week 2022. We're delighted to be with you this morning. I'm Gaillard. I'm the founder and managing director of Corix Partners, and we're a boutique management consulting business based in London, focused on helping CIOs and C-level execs with security strategy, organization, governance, operating models, and those type of challenges. I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Burtenshaw this morning, who is the CEO and founder of Strata Security. Chris, do you want to tell us a bit more about yourself?
Hi, JC. Yes, thanks very much for inviting me. Yeah, as mentioned, I'm CEO of Strata Security. We're all about making security teams more effective by joining up data from all of the tools and environments that security teams commonly work with today. So we're all about efficiency and automation, that kind of thing.
Great stuff. Thanks, Chris. That's definitely something we're going to be talking about during this session. So we're going to be looking back at the cybersecurity technical debt. I'm going to start by setting the scene, so to speak, but through a quick keynote, maybe 10 minutes, and then I will hand over to Chris, who will tell us a bit more about how he deals with this and what he sees with his clients at Strata. What are we going to be talking about? Cybersecurity technical debt. What is it? Where it's coming from, what's the problem, what can be done to deal with it. That's essentially what we're going to be talking about. Okay. Before we get to that, a few house rules just to remind you all participants that this session is recorded. So essentially, one of us will be available, or both of us will be available to answer when it's broadcast on the 23rd of June through the chat. If you have any questions, feel free to post them on the chat as you would normally do, and we will do what we can to answer, and we will pick them up either on the day or later and answer them separately. You've got all our details on our respective websites, stratasecurity.co.uk, corixpartners.com, on the respective contact pages. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and you will have more details about us at the end. Chris, anything you want to add to that before I start?
No, really. I'd say, as you said, contact details are actually on the final slide as well. So people should be able to scan and find both of us if they'd like to with a QR code.
Good stuff. Thank you, Chris. Now let's get started. Cybersecurity technical debt. So where do we start? Well, we have to start by stating, frankly, that for the best part of the last 2 decades, most large organizations have kept addressing cybersecurity purely as a technical problem. And we all know, all cybersecurity professionals would know that, of course, it is not just a technical problem. It has a business dimension. It has a number of different dimensions, but regardless, most large organizations have kept addressing it as a purely technical problem. And let's face it, it's not working too well. Many large organizations are still failing to protect themselves. And that's not just because the threats morph constantly or faster than they can adapt. Primarily, most large organizations are suffering from endemic execution problems around the deployment of those technical solutions. And there is also a fundamental disconnect very often between business cycles, which are primarily short-termist, and the longer timeframes, which are often required to deploy those type of technical solutions and to develop cybersecurity maturity in large organizations. So to put it a bit differently, or to use a different angle, what we see too often at Corix Partners are cybersecurity strategies which are invariably architected around technical projects and technical tools. But what we see also very often is that the deployment of those tools rarely goes beyond what I would call quick wins or alleged quick wins, because the business priorities shift constantly. Nobody really looks beyond the mid to long term as would be necessary to really deliver real and lasting change around cybersecurity. The CISOs end up leaving after a few years, after frustration, over slow progress generally, lack of resources, those kind of things. Very often they leave for more money, let's be blunt as well, right? Then another CISO comes in, they has a different view, different pet project, different pet tools, and that's essentially how the technical debt starts to pile up. old tendencies, which have been greatly aggravated by the COVID pandemic, which, for all sorts of good reasons, has fueled a variety of tactical approaches. So you may think that I'm painting a pessimistic picture here, but I'm sure many participants will recognize a number of things I've just mentioned. And after 2 decades at playing that game, some cybersecurity practices are now operating around up to 20 or 30 different tools in large organizations. That's not just that's not us saying, or it's not just us saying. A couple of times a year you'll come across a number of vendor surveys who would confirm it. One from Cisco, I think, which goes back to the beginning of 2020, which put the numbers around 20. And I think I picked up one earlier this year from Trend Micro, which puts the number more around 30. But to be honest, you will come across those kind of stats and those kind of surveys several times a year, and it's validated literally every day or every week. increases world by field evidence. What does that mean in practical terms? It means that, frankly, when you look at the way those cybersecurity practices operate, nothing is never joined up, because it is simply the result of decades of organic short-termism, strategic plans which were never strategic or never rolled out properly, knee-jerk reactions in response to incidents, knee-jerk reactions in response to audit observations, and even in some cases panic buying ahead of regulatory inspections. We've seen that as well. It results in very complex security operational processes, which are poorly integrated, excessively manual, repetitive, and frankly, boring for the poor analysts who are in charge of delivering them. And on top of that, when you add all those things up, when you look at all of the above and you add it up, you end up with something which is tremendously expensive to scale up. Frankly, if you can find the skills and the resources, because I don't need to tell most of our participants, I suppose, that there is a very significant shortage of skills around cybersecurity, primarily because most industry sectors have woken up to the criticality of cyber, and in the wake of the non-stop avalanche of cyber attacks we've been seeing for the past 10 years. And of course, everybody is now competing for a resource pool which has not necessarily grown sufficiently over the period. But there are several sides to this argument. Of course, the resource pool has not grown sufficiently, but it's not just a talent acquisition problem that the industry has. It's also a retention problem, and that is taking us straight back to what we were saying before about those dysfunctional security operational processes and the sort of boring entry-level jobs we give many analysts to do when they join. There is nobody in this world who joins a cybersecurity team to end up cutting and pasting data into Excel spreadsheets or to produce useless reports just to put ticks in useless compliance boxes. I'm sorry to be a bit pessimistic here again, or a bit cynical maybe, but again, sadly we see those things day in, day out. Those guys at the first available opportunity, they leave to do another job, something more exciting, and they don't come back, and they carry with them an image of cybersecurity which is not necessarily the one we would like them to carry with them when they move on. So I'm going to apologize for a third time about sounding too pessimistic, but I'm sure many of you in the audience would recognize at least a number of things I've been saying in your own experience. We start to see here, if you put all those various aspects together, you start to see emerging the core of that spiral of failure around cybersecurity, which has been plaguing many large organizations. The excessive focus on tech products to solve cybersecurity challenges, the reverse engineering of processes around the capabilities of the tools, and the colossal accumulation of technical debt, which is the result of execution failure and the lack of priority focus by business leaders. So what you need to do if you want to break out of this. To me, it's clear that you need to stop buying more tech for the sake of it every time something happens, and you need to start at the state of your cybersecurity landscape, and you need to start decluttering. And that, for me, is the core of what I would like to say here in answer to that question: how to manage the mounting cybersecurity technical debt. There is a suggestion I picked up in an interview given by Greg Day, who was the CSO for Palo Alto in Europe. And he says in that interview, for every new solution, remove 2 legacy solutions. I think that's a brilliant idea. I would just add, it's easier said than done, because to those 2 legacy solutions you would be removing, fundamentally, they are probably doing something for you somewhere. You're using them to do something. They are part of a process which may be dysfunctional, which may be disjointed, which may be whatever it is, but which is your process and which is part of the way you operate. So taking out those two solutions, it's a good idea, but it forces you to look back at the architecture of your operational processes and how you can streamline those. It will force you to look back at process and how you automate your process, your cybersecurity processes. And behind that, it should force you as well to focus more on improving the efficiency of the analysts, so that they can, in a context where, frankly, you know you will struggle to replace them if they leave, and you know you will struggle to add more if you need to add more. So allowing them to dedicate more time to more challenging tasks, and allowing them to free themselves from the most boring and from the most boring and repetitive things they're meant to be doing. Those things are good things to aim at. So in a nutshell, it's one way of saying that when you start looking at the problem in that way and refocusing back on process, you end up probably where you should have started. People, process, then technology. In other words, not buying technology for the sake of it, but buying technology in support of processes which are designed to protect the firm and its people from cyber threats. That's the end of my scene setting, if you want. I appreciate this is harder than buying the next shiny tool and which is designed to put the box in and the right tick in the right box on the next compliance report. But I really think this kind of approach, which consists of refocusing back on process, people, then technology, is the right way to start controlling the cybersecurity technical debt and hopefully bringing it back in control. I'm going to stop here, Chris. I'm going to hand over to you. Tell us a little bit how you see this and how you're dealing with it at Strata.
Well, yes, thanks, and thanks for obviously those thoughts. Many of those things that you said echo with both what we see and also what we hear our customers saying as well. So, what's our kind of response? What do we see in that area? Well, a lot of what you mentioned about the manual process really resonates. If you talk to a security manager or a CISO, in many organizations, you ask them what takes up most of their time or what's their biggest pain point, and they will say it's getting for example, data together into one place for management reporting or something like that. So unfortunately, we're in a bit of a copy and paste industry at the moment. So there's a lot of people that are kind of, I guess, looking for a better way, but as you also hinted at, doing things better also takes resource, and you can't stop the processes that are already running in order to improve them. So there's kind of like a trade-off there of trying to kind of like improve the overall process versus actually just getting the work done already. And as you hinted as well, if the team's already under-resourced, there's a question of how exactly they can strategically move on from where they are at the moment, without having all those plates fall down to the floor in a big pile. So yes, definitely, all those things you've mentioned are somewhat hot topics at the moment. So I've also got a short presentation, really, I guess, seeing maybe the other side of the coin from some of those things that you mentioned. And I'll just sort of start with that now. I generally start with this slide here, which is about the landscape. And as JC said, 30 technologies on average, anywhere up to 100 by some research that I found at one point as well. So if you were sort of try and put on the have a day in the shoes of the security manager in maybe a team of 3, for example, they're spending a lot of their time maybe looking at different places to answer questions from both the internal team and the external business. So, for example, to get a single view, so to get information about what assets are out there, there's probably a CMDB somewhere. It's probably out of date. That's the sort of evergreen problem. And then, of course, with cloud, you've not just got the different cloud environments, so Azure, AWS, Google, for example, but you may have different instances of those clouds in order to manage. So, in the old days, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, you might have been content with managing everything just within your data center. Now, everybody is in at least one cloud, probably several. So, the complexity surface that the security team is managing is infinitely more complex than it was, but also, as JC said, it's changing much more rapidly with digital transformation and general industry trends. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, which we're now well into our second year of. So it's been an interesting time for many teams. So, okay, so what's the outcome of this? So obviously there's this technology landscape, there's lots of tools in lots of places. We kind of call this a little bit of an alphabet soup because there's just so many acronyms, IDS, IPS, DNS, all kinds of things. So there's an alphabet soup of tools. What does that mean? Well, as a security team, first of all, I want to know what I've got. And secondly, I need assurance that it's secure. And thirdly, I need assurance that my security business processes are taking place as they should. So the upshot of that landscape of complexity is you're probably doing what we call InfoSec excellence, which is spending a lot of time in Excel, copying, pasting data between tools and platforms, which obviously is incredibly time consuming, frustrating, and quite frankly, that's not why you embarked on a career in cybersecurity. So I've got this, maybe I'm manually copying and pasting this data between tools. I maybe built some kind of, I guess, initial process, which allows me to keep some sort of level of visibility and control. But actually, that may work technically, but it may not give the level of MI which management need in order to have confidence that the, for example, the security team is operating as it should be, or maybe in order to make a business case for increasing the resource available to that team. So what does management want? So from an operational point of view, you might need something like a spreadsheet like this to keep on track of everything. But from a management point of view, what you want is something like this. You want, sort of very high level stats that can be tracked repeatedly by, for example, C-suite, senior management, or even increasingly external investors, boards, that kind of thing. They want to have assurance that security is embedded and operating correctly. So if I want to produce something like that, how do I go about it? Now, as mentioned, obviously, you've probably not got a great deal of spare time. So what we do in order to achieve something like this is we connect your data to the cybersecurity controls that you need or want to report against. So you've got all your different tools out there, connect all the data together, and that broadly is asset data, state data, monitoring data, and coverage data. And what we do is use that information to give us metrics that we can associate with the controls that we're reporting against. So, for example, if you're following ISO 27001 as your standard, there's a set of controls there that it makes sense to report against. Obviously, things like Cyber Essentials, PCI, NIST, these all have requirements. And of course, you want to show something like in the previous slide, reflecting your status against those controls. This, obviously, if you're sort of Working manually can be very time consuming, which is why obviously we've got a solution for this. But what's the benefit of this approach, which we call joined up security? Well, we reckon it can save on average around a third of your week, which is pretty significant. So you might be expecting, okay, that's a bit of a bold statement. How do we back that up? So just to sort of illustrate a typical week, this is 40 hours, 5 days of 8 hours each. So, sort of Monday to Friday, for example. Sort of putting the hat on of the typical security team member, what are they spending their time doing? So maybe investigating some alerts, perhaps they're producing weekly reporting, perhaps some monthly or management reporting, some project work, of course, and maybe some time allocated for some threat hunting. So we want to make sure that we're looking for the latest threats in the environment. That's great, that's your week full. But actually, when that meets reality, what you often find is that an auditor pops up or somebody external and asks a question and says, hey, can you just tell me what we're doing about patching? And what did we do last month? Is everything up to date or something like that? And can you evidence this? Is the typical question. And of course, that really just throws out the window your sort of normal plan. So if you can imagine having the data to hand, in pretty much all of those examples that I've given you can save you significant time. So for example, if the auditor question, instead of taking you a day and a half to answer, took you an hour, obviously you can be in a much better place to take your business forward. So in summary, more accessible data means that you've got more time to spend on improving your operations and improving security instead of copying and pasting information between different tools. And really, that's the crux of it. Obviously, taking that data from real world tools, turning it into metrics that can be repeatedly produced and reported against, and saving time during operations, whether that be investigation, threat hunting, project work, etc. Having that single view is extremely valuable, and it's something that's kind of been missing within our industry. Other industries, let's say finance, for example, finance professionals have got a plethora of tools out there that allow them to have a single view of all their bank accounts and transactions, for example. But that's something that is really needed within the cybersecurity sector. That single trusted view of state and also history going back. And that's really it, really. So I think we do have at the end of this a few minutes for some questions. Now, obviously, as JC said, we will be joining the, this is recorded, we will be joining the event live to answer your questions on the chat. But I think there's a couple of things that sort of popped up from that, popped into my head when JC was talking earlier, and I suspect he might have a couple from me as well. So do you want to start, JC?
Yeah, just looking at your slides on metrics, it reminded me of the work we did with the Security Transformation Research Foundation, which is a think tank affiliated to Corix partners. It's a piece of work we did around 2019, I think, precisely on that topic, dashboards and metrics. And I think you're right. I think the top level execs expect something to be put in front of them which is actionable, which is repeatable. And of course, the maturity below that has to be sufficiently developed to produce those reports. What do you think are the main challenges you're out of everything you've been talking about, what do you think are the main challenges your clients are seeing these days?
Well, I think it's really keeping on top of those fast-paced environments, and also when incidents occur, being able to respond more quickly and more efficiently. So to give you a specific example, in recent months, Log4j, or Log4Shell, which had the issues just before Christmas, which kept everybody busy. That was an example where there was a diverse set of tools that had relevant information. However, the prioritization decision, as in, which things do I fix first, because many things perhaps were affected at once, was spread was reliant on that information that was spread across systems. So it's really about bringing that data into one place so they can make better decisions more quickly and don't have to scramble around all over the place. I mean, specifically with Log4j, the question was around which of these tools that have detected Log4j in my systems, which of these instances were actually exploitable. So we had a customer that was looking at the combination of whether a particular machine had ports open that would indicate whether the Log4j installation that was found may be exploitable or not, and that enabled prioritization of working on particular systems as opposed to others, because there were many detections of Log4j on systems, but they weren't exploitable. So that's a way of kind of, I guess, more efficiently working at something that previously would have been perhaps a bit less targeted.
Great, and we did a nice podcast episode on that as well, Chris, on Log4j.
We did, yes.
On the Cybersecurity Transformation podcast, for those who want to go and track it down. You can find all that on the Corix Partners website in thought leadership section. You've got links to all those resources. Any question for me, Chris, before we bring this to a close?
I mean, I was just going to say Log4j obviously was one of those things that everybody should be preparing for, but it also was the first remotely exploitable kind of vulnerability for some time with such wide coverage. So it was really interesting to see which environments had perhaps moved a little more quickly than the efficiency of their security controls, which is quite interesting. But yeah, questions for you. I mean, really, all of this really is underpinning discussions about the skills gap that clearly there is in the market at the moment. Is that something that you're seeing as being a particular problem right now?
The skills gap is a big problem, and as I said, it has multiple dimensions, and it's key to look at it in all dimensions, to be able to start looking for solutions. Very often, it is assumed that this is something which is going to be solved by just throwing more resources at training, at education programs, and all that. I think this is simplistic. I think there is indeed a shortage of skills because everybody is trying to hire cybersecurity talent because all industries have woken up to the problem, and COVID has made it worse. So there is no doubt. But there is also a talent acquisition problem in the shape of the industry being too how can I put it? The industry still projecting an image which is too technical, too negative, not so showcasing sufficiently what it is about. This is not just about padlocks and guys in hoodies in the basement. The industry is far more diverse than that. There is a huge diversity of roles. And the industry is not very good at showcasing that, and the industry is not very good at showcasing opportunities for very diverse talents as well. So I think there are problems with the talent acquisition pipeline, and then there is the retention problem we mentioned, which is the fact that the people we attract, we end up giving them jobs which are boring, and they leave too early without realizing any potential and carrying with them an image which is not the right image they should carry with them about the cybersecurity industry. So all those problems are real, but they are very complex to deal with, I think. But they're at the heart of what the industry is facing. And I
guess really what we need to do is find more ways for to reduce the things that suck for the security team amongst trying to encourage the right sort of talent into the industry. I saw a flippant comment from someone that cybersecurity isn't a junior role, but clearly there are many junior roles in the sector.
And I want to reiterate to our audience that we have not gone off a tangent here. Reducing the technical debt, decluttering cybersecurity estates, streamlining security operational processes is an important part in making the entry-level jobs more attractive, in reducing the attrition rate at that level. And those problems are linked in that way. So the clever automation we've been talking about, the decluttering of cybersecurity estates, the refocusing on process to make processes more efficient, all that will help with attracting talent and retaining talent. So those problems are linked in that way. We have not gone off the tangent completely.
Yeah, no, true. It's a good point to make.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you to all participants. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. You've got the 2 QR codes on the screen. You've got the 2 websites here. You will find all our details on the contact pages. Many thanks to all of you for listening to us, watching us this morning. Many thanks to the Digital Leaders Week for inviting us to take part. Many thanks, Chris.
Thank you, JC, for having me as well.
Thank you.
Thanks all.